Yo, what's up everybody here at This Mix is Sick. I am super truly hyped to bring you this course. We're going to mix and master EDM like a pro with just using stock plugins only. Why do I want to bring you this course? Well, of course, there's already the beginner course for EDM mixing and mastering with stock plugins available here. And I wanted to level it up for you. This course is especially made for that. What you will learn is how you can mix and master an EDM track, create your own workflow that works for you, brings you the results that you need, and that is able for you to repeat. So you can have a workflow that works every time. You're gonna get walked through the entire mixing process, from the kick to the bass, to the kick and bass, to the individual drums, to the drum group, to the vocals, to the FX, and through the instruments. This track that we're using is a dope one that is released through Spinning Records. It's called My People, and it is produced by Sam Collins and Albert Breaker and myself. This track is super dope because it's a banging club track with a big lead synth, while the drums are more in the tech house realm. So it's a super interesting track, and it's out now through Spinning's Hysteria label. Then, for those who don't know me yet, I am Bram Vidder. I'm an EDM mixing and mastering engineer here at This Mix is Sick. I mix and master hundreds of records, and you can book my mixing and mastering services through thismixisick.com. That leads to Sound Better, where I've had the honor of listing first in the total top mastering engineers list multiple times. Here in the studio, I mix and master EDM tracks through the analog equipment and make them sound as sick as possible for all of you. That obviously means that I'm using a lot of professional plugins as well, but for this course, we won't use any of those. We're going to stick with stock plugins because it starts with the basics, and I am going to try my ultimate best to make you as confident as possible with mixing and mastering your next EDM track. So you will find out that at the end of this video it suddenly cuts off. Why? This is because you can check out the full course right now on Skillshare. That said though, I wanted to give you an insight into the course already and a little preview so you can see if it might be a dope course for you to watch. You can easily hit the link in the description to sign up for your free Skillshare trial period. In this period, you can check out the whole course and it won't cost you anything. Or of course, for those who are already signed up to Skillshare, you can go and check it out in its entirety right now over there. Welcome. In the session, we are here in the track, and before starting a mix, a couple things are really important to be handled. Why? Well, it's to get you in a good starting position to mix. And then it's very important to be effective and create a workflow for yourself where you can be focused on making the adjustments that you actually need to make. So it's very important, for example, to have a clear view on your session, to know what's where, what color is what element, what's the order of things, how loud is my gain stage, for example. If you keep those about the same for you in every session, you will quickly realize that it's a way of training yourself to be a better mixer. So right now in front of me, we see the entire session. Everything is one color, and you can already see that the stems are a bit loud. I did this on purpose just to show you why it's important to get this bang on before you're starting. Otherwise, if you have too loud stems and you're gonna apply all kind of processing the processing won't work as good as it would with enough headroom, and you be basically wasting your time because you need enough headroom to begin your mix. So right now, if we look at the drop, it's totally clipping and it's absolutely not sounding good. So what I'll do is lower all stems by 10 dBs. This is not an exact number, so sometimes your stems even need to be pushed up. Sometimes they need to be pushed down. 5 dB, 10 dB, 15 dB. It really depends on the material, so don't keep these numbers in mind for exact amounts, because what you want, let's see where we're at now. So right now it's still at about 0. So what we're gonna do is dial back another 10 dB because I really want enough headroom so we can push things. So that might be a bit too much headroom. I'm gonna go with 7.5. Let's see where we're at. So right now the stems are at the right volume, and what we're gonna do is create groups. Why? Because it gives us control over the entire group. We can easily color the groups and assign that chosen color to all the stems in the group. And groups are easily to order. So what you can do, for example, and totally follow your preferred way, create a way for yourself. But what you, for example, could do is have the kick always on top, the bass always under it, the drums under that. In this example, we're gonna follow the order I love to use, which is really top down. We start with the vocal, then we have the instruments, followed by the drums, followed by the low end, which is kick and bass. And to be specific with the kick, I love to have, if there's kick layers, I love to have the main kick as most down stem. If there's any top kicks, they will go above that. Then for bass lines, if there is the multiple layers, I always pick the most subby one to go on the bottom. So for example, the sub bass, and build it up from there with the bass layer or even layers sometimes. Then what we're gonna do is already think ahead, because if you mix, it's about the entire process, not only about the choices you make. For example, if you want to add group processing, then it's important which elements are in that group. So if you, for example, have a lot of crashes, hi-hats, all that sort of stuff, and you saturate it a lot, then it will definitely shape the tone of those elements. And if you want that, then that's cool. But if you don't, then it's important to, have control over these elements as well. Again, it's really about what do you want? Where do you think your sound, your element will sound at its best through the processing that you're going to apply on it? So for example, I love to keep my effects bus clean. Why? It's because there's a lot of sounds that are in the back, and these are not the main elements of the track, and mostly there are really high quality downlifter samples sort of stuff. So I'm not going to apply a lot of group processing most of the times on them. For drums, for example, I definitely want them all in a group together, hi-hats, claps, because I love to use compression on that group, or clipping, or saturation, mid-side EQing. It's important in which group you put your elements. So already start thinking ahead this early in the process. Well, now let's try and put everything in 5 groups, which is low end, drums, instruments, effects, and vocals. Then we're gonna color those groups and we're gonna put it in the order that I just described. Kick on the bottom, bass above that. Let's go into the low end group, drums above that, instruments above that, effects above that, and on top we got the vocals. So let me just do that right now, and then I'll see you back in a prepped session. So we are here in the prepped session. We can see in dark red we got the kicks, the bass line, the top bass line. On the drums we got all the drum elements. The names are correct. If you want to be able to be effective and focused on mixing creatively and powerfully, then it's really important to exclude as many as possible factors, which could be unclear mix prep, unclear naming, unclear order, all kind of things that you can do that don't require any creative vision, because you can just do them without even listening to the music, but it creates a session for you where you can really focus on what's important. So you can see here in red the drums, in the green we got all instruments, and white are all the effects, then all the vocals in pink, and I got the lead vocal here on top because I always think it's good to have the lead vocal and any other vocals. In this case it's a lot of vocal shots and effects. It could be a background vocal as well, then this would be BG down here. So this way I really easily can tell what's going on in the project. So what I absolutely always do is export a version of the premix as well. What's a premix? The word already says it. It's the session pre-mixing. So it's the moment that the production gets exported into stems and I get in the stems, pull them up in the session, then press play. That's the premix. Why is this important? I think it's really important to be able to go back and forth between the premix and your mix. This way you can hear what you're changing, but as well where elements were positioned in the production stage. So if you, for example, hear that a vocal effect is very much in the back, then yeah, that most likely indicates that the client or the artist for who you work doesn't want that vocal effect to be super upfront. Sometimes the client sends a rough mix as well. That's their own version of the master. In this case, that was not what was going on. So what I did is I have loaded up the premix here, and then I have loaded up the prelimit here. This is the exact same file. The only thing we're gonna do here is add a limiter. So what this does is it gives us a very rough point of reference. This is what the premix will sound like limited. It's really good to have because you can just get a super rough idea of how the mix would sound mastered. Absolutely no critical listening or stuff like that. Just to have a premix and a mastered premix. As well, this is a good moment to load in your reference mixes. This can be either way done through a plugin or just by pulling them up in a references lane in your DAW. keep in mind that you don't want to send your reference through your mastering chain. It's critical to listen to the file without any processing active. So now that the mix is prepped, let me talk a bit more about the vision for the mix. We are mixing dance music here, and I think this is very genre depending, but the principles are all very much alike. You need a powerful foundation, which is in the kick, in the bass, and you need a powerful groove, which is in the drums. Then the next super important thing is that the most important elements translate well. Why do I say only the most important elements? Because these are the USPs of the track. If you got a hook, if you got a vocal, if you got anything that makes a track stick in your mind, then that needs to be up front. That doesn't mean that all other elements should be washed out. They should definitely find their place in the mix as well. But the most important elements needs to be extremely clearly hearable on all devices. So this is the order that we're gonna do things here in this session. First, we're gonna mix the kick. Then we're gonna mix the bass. Then we're gonna mix those together, mixing the low end, the kick and the bass. Then we're gonna mix the drums. All individual elements first, then the drums as a group. If those sound fire, we're gonna mix those together, the kick, the bass, and the drum group. What's the next thing is the instruments. We're first gonna focus on the lead synth. This can be a synth, as in this track, but it can be, of course, anything that's a lead. So make sure to take the things away from this session and implement them on the individual track that you got. Every track is different, so make sure to not copy paste, but put yourself in a position to decide what's the lead, to decide what's the most important element. Every track is different, so keep that in mind. Then we're gonna make sure the kick, bass, and synth work together in a great way. Then we're gonna add all the effects, because effects can give the illusion that things are mixed as well. If there's lots of stuff happening with noises, it can really hide some problems. So if you just mute your effects until the kick, bass, and instruments are mixed, I think you will get a better result. Then after that, as final stage, we're gonna mix the vocal. Why we are mixing the vocal as last is because the vocal is so important that when mixing it to a finished mixed track, it will just fall into place at its best. And if you hear that there's things that need to be changed in the mix to get the vocal right, you can do it as well still, but it makes it way more doable to get a really stunning record. And it's just amazing to mix a vocal on a track that already sounds super dope. So this is the order that we're gonna do things. And I want to just once more emphasize that it's so important to have your own vision here. Just focus on what makes you feel the most confident in the studio. And no one will hear the order in which you mix things. No one will see the colors of your channels. So do whatever you need to make your mixes sound as best as they can. So right now that we're all set up and ready to go mix, we are going to start with the kick. My advice is to loop the busiest part of the track. Then you can just mix that part and take it from there onwards onto the rest of your song. So let's have a listen to the first build up and drop into that big synth, which is, I think, a great starting point to, just loop and mix the kick with. Let's go.
a sequence. Hit that gangsta boots on.
Sounds already super dope. This track is absolute fire, and the kick is, as I recall correctly, from a Mala sample pack. It's already a super good, powerful kick, and the sample as is already powerful enough. But we want to optimize things for this track, and normally I'm using third-party plugins, but in this course I just want to basically mix the entire track with stock plugins. And we're gonna pull up 3 plugins here. First is an EQ, second is a simple compressor, and the third is a simple saturator. And then what I'm going to do is copy the EQ as well to after the compressor, because the signal chain is going from left to right. So we first have some EQ, compression, another EQ into the saturation. Let's first start and maybe feel how a high shelf would work on this kick, how it would sound. Sounds a bit more open, and the kick just, yeah, comes through a bit more clearly. Let's listen and see if there's any other frequencies that might be worth boosting or cutting. Sounds good. It got a little bit more oomph, it got a bit more presence, and the kick just sounds a bit less muddy to me, a bit more clear, and the bass already got a lot of mid frequency. So yeah, this kick definitely benefits from a more smiley type curve. Then next up is the compressor. We're gonna try to blend in super extreme settings, but we're gonna blend it in through the dry wet button, because I'm not a big fan of compressing the entire kick. It's not something I really do. Let's put it at limiting, and let's do a super fast release time. Let's pull up a sidechain of 80 Hertz. That's all good. And let's try to get a super attacky sounding kick, if at 100%. So if we're at 100% now, the kick slams so hard that it's not nice anymore. By the way, I've put the output at 10.5 because you could see in the yellow that the gain reduction was 10.5. So this gives you a quick way to gain stage in the plugin. Let's push in some of the wet signal and don't go too crazy here. You maybe only want to do a couple of percent. Sounds about right for me. Let's A and B before and after compressing and the EQ. Sounds dope. Let's see if the EQ after the compressor can change the tone of the compressed signal in a pleasant way, or maybe it's not really needed. We just leave the EQ here for a potential need for it after we apply the saturation. What does saturation do? It's creating harmonics. This makes the sound more full, literally, and creates a more dense signal, which is super important if you want to have, high RMS and a loud master in the end. Let's dial in same fission as the compressor. Let's dial in some extreme settings, see what it does. We might go back into a bit less extreme settings because it can really be, only a little that we need. So it definitely adds character to the track. But do we want to add character or do we want to mix the track? That's a good question. I am definitely happy that we explored the sound of these two plugins. But I think this would be the best decision. Why? Because I feel that these two plugins together get the kick exactly where we want it to be right now. Keep in mind, every track is different, but don't be scared to just remove plugins if you don't feel that they are doing anything good to the signal. Be willing to go back. Be brave enough to say, okay, I didn't make the best decision there, so I go 1 step back or 2 steps back. And do this throughout your entire mixing session. It's really important. So the kick and bass, we made it sound from this into this. If this is active, it's on. Let's have a listen.
Gangsta boots on.
Actually, I feel that the kick could be about a dB louder, so let's check that out. Yeah, 0.5 really works good for this kick. Just a bit more volume there. Nice. Let's go into the next bit, which is the bass line. Alright, so next up is the bass line. Let's have a listen and focus on what we think is important to handle in this bass line. So the top bass that is coming in later is really high, so it's not really important to get that mixed with the bass line. What we're gonna do actually is put that in the instrument group, as I think it works better there. Let's focus on this. Let's start with a compressor and see if we can make the bass notes hit nice and even. So what I did is bring back the peaks a bit of the bass in a very gentle way and make sure to do it in parallel. My goal here is to decrease the dynamics a bit of the bass line so that in the end I'm thinking ahead already. If this track is like boosted to the max after mastering, then you just need to have a super tight pre-master, you know? So if the bass is super controlled and hits at about the same peak level on every note, then that definitely will be beneficial for the master result. Now that we got it tight and under control, let's see if saturation does some magic here. So that definitely adds some richness to the bass, and keep in mind the order that I did this. First, get it under control, then saturate the controlled signal. Not the other way around, because it's better like this. The saturation just works more effectively if you do it after the compressor. It's the order that's really important. The main reason is that the saturator reacts alike because the peaks are all controlled. If, for example, a peak would be super high, then that would hit the saturator way harder, causing it to create way more harmonics than if you have the next peak that's a lot less hard. So if you compress first, then the peaks that go into the saturator will be controlled, therefore creating a unified saturation tone. This specific bass has no side information, therefore we don't have to focus on getting it to translate well on bass. If it does, it's really important to make sure that the sub bass is in mono. How you can make sure that this is the case is listen to the track, it's mids only like this. Or listen to the sides only like this. You can hear in this bass that all the sub and the whole signal is playing in the mid only. So yeah, this will not create any issues. If it does create issues, and if you hear that the sub bass, for example, is super wide, then you can switch on bass mono and just listen. Like that to the sub frequencies. Many times you will see videos where it's being said bass should be in mono, but bass is quite a broad definition. Bass can be, you know, anywhere from all the way down on the spectrum to quite high up. It's yeah, not really true that you need to have your bass all in mono, but your sub should definitely be in mono. But that said, don't be scared to have sub in your side signal. But then it should definitely be intentional. So for example, in a house track like this one, I don't advise it, but for example, what could really work well in a slap house record or a super commercial radio type track, or a super atmospheric epic type of break, if you have your bass and even a bit of the sub a bit more wide, then that could definitely work in the breaks. Just make sure that it's not overdone with stereo imaging. If you are out of phase, then that will mean that if you are playing the track on a mono system, that you just literally don't hear the signal. So that's a big no-go. But focusing on this one, we have no issues here at all. So we leave it as is. What we're now gonna do is make sure that the sidechain compression with the kick, which already has been done by the producer in this case, let's just see if it needs any additional sidechain compression. With the kick, we'll load up the kick here. Let's just go super fast here. No, I don't think it's needed. If it's needed, then definitely make sure that you focus on the groove, focus on really ducking the bass line, and be aware that if you're using a plugin like Kickstart, then make sure that you keep in mind what kind of kick you have. If you have a super long kick, your sidechain needs to duck a lot longer than if you have a really clicky short tailed kick. The kick is different, so that means that there's different amount of space available for the bass to sit in. Just don't think this works always. Just always think, why does this work? What does this specific element need? The kick and bass before and after mixing. If I play this one, it's before. If I play this one, it's after. And we didn't yet mix the group, but let's see what this already did. Slaps way harder. You can feel that the bass sits way more powerful in the mix. It's not that like in the before. It's a bit plain and boring. The mixed version definitely has impact and power. That's what you want as early as possible in your mix. Now it gets super interesting when mixing the low end bus, because we need to change our mindset here. We're not mixing the kick, we're not mixing the bass, we're mixing the kick and bass. We basically see it as one element. And this is a super important mindset change, because if you feel the kick should be louder, then that's not something you should fix in mixing the low end bus. You should mix that in the specific channel. But if you feel that you're there where you want to be, and you want to mix the tone of these elements together, then that's where group processing comes into play. A great way to create a unified sound in your group is saturation, as it creates harmonics on these elements together, and it's amazing if you want a unified sound. But any other plugin really creates a tone on the bus, so it will automatically apply on all elements summed together. So let's start with an EQ, and let's start by cutting the super low frequencies to create some headroom for us. That sounds good. Let's try to bring out some more of the presence of the kick and bass together. Sounds slamming. I really like it. Let's go and compress the kick and bass bus together. So it's dope. What I did is literally make sure that there's no peaks going out of control with the compressor, so there's almost no compression happening. I think it was maximum at like 0.6 or something. This felt good. Pushed a bit of wet compressed signal in. Fast release, slow attack. It's just to really make sure that nothing spirals out of control. Then on the EQ, I decreased a little bit the high shelf. Felt better like this. It brought out a bit too much dirt, I think. And I boosted the root note with a quite narrow Q. Because on the low cut we shaved off a bit of the super low frequencies. But I was feeling that the bass root note that's so important in this drop, in this track, is so important here to really feel powerful. And boosting it here instead of on the channel is nice because it will apply as well on the kick sound. Therefore the whole root note just gets emphasized more in this low end mix. As a last step, let's see what saturation does on this group. I don't really feel that saturation does anything good to this group. Honestly, it's a bit hard as well with stock plugins. A great saturation tool that I love using on a low-end bus, but only if it's needed, is the Ozone Vintage Tape, for example. It's amazing when you need a bit of extra sub power. It's really good. The basic tools are a bit more difficult. I want to stay away as well from creating crazy routing stuff because I just want this course to be easy to understand and focus on the basics and show you that mixing a track with stock plugins is just 100% doable, and it's really all you need to get a super powerful result. But that's not saying that plugins are not super handy sometimes. Understanding this first helps you so much to come up with a better result in the end. Alright, so we're gonna mix the drums. We're gonna first mix all the individual elements of the drums, and then we're gonna have a look at the drum group and see what we can do on that to even bring it further. Let's start with going over the most important elements, which are the claps and the hi-hats. I'll just go on and do the mix. I personally love soloing the kick and building it up from there. So let's get started. So quickly going over what I did on the claps. The third clap here is a nice wide clap, so I made it super wide because there was already side information. So it went from this to there. I made it louder and more wide. Then on the second clap I didn't do anything, and on the first clap I decided, okay, this is going to be the main clap, and I dirty it up with the saturation. Then together everything sounds like this. And why I did the compressor on the group of the claps, which I just made, is because that's a great way to pull them together and make them sound like one sound. Because if you listen to this, you can still hear that they are three different claps. But if I enable the compressor, I think it feels more like one clap. And that's really dope. Let's go over the hi-hats. So what I did is I made the dirty head sound a bit more crunchy and the open head a bit more airy. Then I found that they were a bit too much in the same space, so I really subtly altered their panning. I don't prefer heads that are panned so extreme in house music or in EDM in general that it really catches attention, but subtly it can definitely add a bit more of a wide feel to your drums and hi-hats in this case. Let's go over why I didn't do any EQ on the claps. That's because I didn't feel it was needed. I really like the tone, and what I did do to adjust the tone is boost the lower layer of the claps, which is the white layer. So in my mixing vision, this already is a move that I made to get the tone a bit more as I wanted it to be. Then on the hi-hats, I did a low cut as well to make them sound a bit more clean. I found that they were a bit too mid-range intense. Let's see how the hi-hat and clap sounded before and after mixing. This is the before, this is the after. Let's have a listen. Let me continue mixing the individual elements and sometimes talking about what I did and why I did it. It's a feel thing as well, so I think taking you with me in the process is a nice way to get you to understand my thought process and as well my changes that I make in the mix. So my thought process here, on the right I found that the right 2 sounded a bit too clean, like this. I added a really little bit, only 7% of overdrive saturation. If I do it a lot, it sounds like this. To just give the sound a bit more definition. A ride can really be dope in a drum group if it's colored nice and if it just feels a bit defined. It's really nice. It's not only the sizzle that you want. For the drum loops, I started by EQing the first loop and I ended actually by dropping the EQ on the entire group and grouping these drum loops together. Why? There are a lot of loops, so if you make them all sound super different, then it just creates a lot of chaos. What I did here is just group them together, and I found that this is a good way to do it because then the loops together will get a more unified sound. And I even brought that further with a saturator. So let's listen to before and after in that regard. I don't compress these, the drum loops sound like they're already compressed and the movement in them is nice. So I leave them as they are with the rides, and let's continue mixing the other drum sounds. I found that this fill is actually pretty important and it's a unique sound. You don't hear this type of sound a lot in tracks. It's cool, and I wanted to really add something to the character of the entire song. So what I did is I overdriven really on the high end, so make the sound a bit more present. Then I blend in a little bit of OTT because I wanted to hype this fill a bit. So it sounds from this to this. I think that's dope. Let's continue mixing. So for some of you, I might went a little bit fast. Others might be used to mixing super quickly. But if you're in the moment and if you feel that you feel in your mind and you're mixing fish and where you want to push towards, then you just need to go with the flow. And what I did here is accentuate with compression the percussion hits. Then afterwards I found that the tom acted as a percussion hit as well, made a group from it, so they got exactly the same compression settings. Of course their volumes are different, but the envelope is the same attack and release wise. Then the percussion hit 2 sounds a bit more accentuated as well. On the percussion hit 3, I just lowered it a bit. Cowbell sounds a bit louder. Nice balance. Then with everything else, did some volume adjustment, and now we got this. So here's the drums before mixing.
This one's for my people, 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 people. This one's for my people, 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 people. I get this one's for my people, 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 people. I get this one's for my people, 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 people. I get this one's for my.
So what am I listening to? I'm listening just to the pre-mix and to where we at right now. I try to focus on the low end and the drums because that's what we really mixed. What I can tell is that pre-mix, the kick, bass and drums sounded a bit all piled up to each other. Right now there's better separation. The elements got more interesting punch to them. They sound more separated and more crisp, and that's really what we want. What I'm going to do on the drum bass is first compress, then I'm going to add some EQ, which then goes into a saturator. This way I will have control over the tone that I'm pushing into saturation. I'm not going to go crazy here. Let's start with compressing. Oh, no, glue. Let's start with the compressor, which in this case is the glue compressor that's built into Ableton. If you don't have the glue compressor built into your DAW, just use any compressor. So what I just did is put the attack to 3. I find that it shaves off the harsh transients, and if I would use this compressor not in parallel, I wouldn't do this because then it would sound too muffled, but I'm using this in parallel, so I'm just shaving off the entire, transients so they're not harsh, and then I'm just blending in some of the compressed signal. So what I did is compress the entire drum group, glue it a bit together, dial back a bit with a super wide low shelf on the lower frequencies, put up a bit of the presence and mid-range into the saturator, which just creates a bit more color and just makes it even more unified. And that finalizes the kick and bass. So now that we got the drums, the bass and the kick absolutely slapping in the mix, we are moving forward to the instruments. Yeah, and cutting it off right there. This is a preview of the course on Skillshare that is available right now for all of you. Make sure to either way go to Skillshare if you're already subscribed, or just use your free trial period through the link in the description to get over to Skillshare and check out this entire course for free. It's a long course, it's only using stock plugins. It's super exciting because it really goes down to the basics of mixing and mastering a track without fancy tools. So I absolutely love making that one. And if you're up to check it out, make sure to do so through the link in the description. Thank you for watching and I see you in the next videos. Yo yo!